more about the inspiration of Be the Change?
Yeah. So while we're at it, so I got really into this thing. You
Yeah.
can't see it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I went into, I was like, because I noticed that you typically do this with a lot of artists, whether they're musicians or whether they're painters and different stuff, and even authors. And I'm a little bit different in that sense. So I wasn't sure how to formulate it. And then I realized Be the Change is a form, the company Be the Change that I've created is a form of artistic expression in a different way. So I kind of started thinking, it almost changed the way that I thought about stuff like that and the way that I was doing things last week. So ultimately, when I look at Be the Change, what caused me to create it was struggle of personal, I guess what caused me to create it was a personal divide in my system of how do I actually start making a difference? How do I go from having a career to doing something, using my voice in a way to actually create change? So that's how it all started. There was the police shooting in Dallas in 2016. And out of that struggle of being frustrated with what's going on in our country right now, why is there so much hate? Being in an industry that was very, very diverse. We had 50% black, 50% white, or however, throw in all the other ethnicities in there. And it was a huge melting pot. And it's a great world being a promotional modeling and brand ambassador and owning a staffing agency that employed 20 or 2,000 people a year. But then I start seeing them on Facebook and on social media and just going at each other in such a racially charged way. And it was either F this president or get mad at this. And I just realized I have a bigger purpose, which was to bring people together. And it's taken some years to get Be the Change to the point where it is right now, where we're actually creating those conversations, creating those changes. And it took a spark of unfortunate mass chaos in our country to get to that point.
What were some occurrences in your life where you had to either or both experience hate on the perpetrating end or experience hate on the receiving victim end? Could you
Yeah. It's interesting. I look back at my life, and all of us, I'm sure, have had moments where we were the perpetrator on that. I don't think we can take that away, but in all honesty, I think a lot of it depends on what point of your life things happen to you. And I will be flat out honest with you. I'm not a fan of a concept of being a victim in any way, shape, or form. But when I was growing up, I was the poor kid in a wealthier school district. When I was a little kid, there was no hate. I was always a very well-behaved kid, according to everybody that knew me, my mom and dad and whatever. So there was never any bad coming from me at that point. But when we moved to St. Louis, Missouri, Chesterfield is where I lived. It was a wealthier, upper middle class white area, and predominantly Jewish, and I'm half Jewish, but I still never quite fit in. And I was the only white kid because we had a deseg. I was the only white desegregation program. I was the only white kid, except for maybe 3 or 4 others that were on free lunch. So I was the poor kid, and then it was me and the black kids were kind of grouped in together where we're getting our free lunch. And there was we didn't see color, obviously, when you're in 3rd grade and 4th grade and 5th grade, you just don't. But there was a definite segregation between the haves and the have-nots. I felt that, which to this day frustrates me because I see people calling out people for their color and saying, you don't understand our struggle. And it goes much deeper than that. And there is obvious, it's society, there's obvious differences between white and black, but I've kind of diverted from the subject. Going back to what you said, I think because it happened to me at a young age that I felt as though I was being victimized or picked on or whatever it might've been, bullied in a sense, that I avoided being the perpetrator. I didn't like that feeling. And that's why I appreciate that I had that time where I got to be a victim, because I realized I did not like the way that felt. And I think that as a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, and now as a 37-year-old, I believe as though that imprint is still there 30 years later, and not in a negative way, a positive way. It's a super positive way to look at things. Is I was blessed to have had that bad, not horrible, that bad experience as a kid, and the cognitive ability to go, I don't want that. I don't want to make anybody else feel like this. Now, I also roast people for fun. Like, that's part of the career that I've had. Like, I'm an MC and it's fun, but there's a sense that when I'm on stage and when I'm doing stuff, people know what I'm doing. I say things with a smile. It's all in jest. And if there's ever been anybody I've offended, there's been a couple times I knew it, there was immediate apologies and I talked to them immediately. And if I said something wrong. So as a perpetrator, I've avoided it at all costs because I learned at a young age to not do that. It doesn't feel right. It's not nice. And ultimately in this day and age, I think that's why I'm so protective. I don't fight on people's social media to change their opinion. I actually get involved in conversations where I feel somebody's being bullied. So and it goes either political way or life struggle way. I want people to have this sense of equality and openness. Nobody's gonna feel the same about everything. But I feel as though all the way from that young age, being the victim in that case has caused me to this day and age to try to be a protector, or that superhero mentality, or God complex, is that God complex? No, it's called savior complex, not a God complex. That would make me an asshole. But more of a savior complex, because that struggle and that pain, I don't want other people to feel. And I see people feeling it every day right now.
Entrepreneurs in general, when pitching for a new idea or a new solution to a problem, they go, the make or break, I believe, in a conversation is the why. Like, why do this? What's the benefit? What's the solution in the future for that? Could you explain your big why in Be the Change?
It's always evolving, and that's life. Like, your why is always evolving. Before people have children, they don't say their why is their kids because they don't have any. And then with business, it can evolve. Sometimes it's your family, sometimes it's who you are. The why with Be the Change for me, honestly, recently changed, because I wasn't actually sure. When I speak to people, when I help people move on and performance coach and all that stuff, I always ask what their why is, and I have trouble answering that question myself. I just know that I'm driven and I'm focused, but I don't know why. So Be the Change, in 2016, when I started it, the why was pain that I saw happening when I see my friends fighting and I see strangers fighting and people not getting along. So the why was to try to create an answer to that. That's not a emotional response necessarily. People feel the why deep within them. It was more of a surface. Like, I was looking around and it was causing me anger, and that was the basics of my why. So that anger and frustration led to that, but it evolves just as we are as people. It's always changing, and it's just, and I know that you do this with a lot of artists too, and it's a very similar thing. Business and art, although opposite sides of the brain, typically still have that same creative sense. It's just finding a different way to relate. And so the why with Be the Change started to change into, well, how can I personally have a voice? What's my exact topic? And the pain of my previous life is kind of where I created my own speaking, which my father was a compulsive gambler, and and we were very poor growing up, in the way, which is always dangerous when you're a gambler and poor. So when I was younger, he gambled with a style called negative progression, which means you double your bet every time you lose. And although very, very dangerous in gambling, I realized how amazing of a philosophy that is in life and in business, and in Be the Change is a perfect example. The idea is, I'm going to fail. You're going to fail. Everybody's going to fail. Be the Change is going to fail on a small level, maybe even a big level. We don't know what's going to happen, but it's how we react to them. And people think to take the struggle and just get past it. You can do it. Just, if something goes wrong, just go back out there and keep going again. And I feel like that's missing this really big element of owning the struggle and feeling the struggle and learning from the struggle. So negative progression is that. It's literally every time you lose, when you double your efforts or double your bet, when you finally win, you're not still down a bunch. You're actually all the way back to start. So like, if you're playing blackjack. You lose 6 hands in a row, but you've doubled your bet every loss. On that 7th hand, you're technically 1 step ahead of where you started. You're not still 5 hands down. So it's a really interesting philosophy. Do not gamble that way. but in life, I've learned this, and I've learned it would be the change that every step back or 2 steps back or 3 steps back is eventually, I know if I do things the right way and I pay attention and I live in the moment of the struggle and understand what's going on and observe that struggle, I'm going to end up ahead. And that's kind of how Be the Change has continued to progress. And that's how I've progressed as a human throughout all of it. And then to take us to the last 2 weeks, going through probably since 2020 is a struggle, but the struggle it's kind of forging this thing. It's forging Be the Change. It's allowing me to realize what I wanted to do 4 years ago in 2016. It's bringing it to fruition now, and it's bringing this togetherness now, and it's finding the people, finding the viewers and the consumers of it, and the people that really eat it up about, I want to be the change that I want to see in the world, and people are taking action for it. However, I still couldn't answer that question. I still couldn't answer what is my why. And it's interesting, the first time you and I talked, I'm like, I have to think about that. What is my why in this moment? And the first major struggle that I could say I've been through is we had a guy that was hosting one of our shows with us. He was funny comedian, doctor, got COVID, and ended up passing away after being in a coma for medically induced coma for 5-6 weeks. And it's the weirdest thing, because in this weird year that we have, I would have never met him. He was a contact of a friend from the show, and we were like, let's bring him on. So this is a gentleman that, if it wasn't for COVID and wasn't for me doing more streaming video and all that work and shows, never would have met him. And then now, from a physical perspective, I'm never actually going to meet him because of COVID. So it's a really weird way to look at it. And ultimately, I found my wife in this moment, and hopefully in the future of Be the Change, and personally through him, because I looked at the way that he was speaking about me, about Be the Change, and about what we were doing through other people as he passed away. And I realized in that moment how important what we were doing was, not just because of him, not because of just because of Dr. Frank, but because he gave his message to us. And what it was through other people was, he was starting to lose hope. He's the bubbliest, most positive human being you've ever seen. And on the surface, you would never think that there could be a negative thought. And he was telling his close friends that, man, this is just a crappy year. There's stuff going on. This sucks. And people are fighting and this, that, and the other. And then he started being a part of what we were doing. And he started watching all of the different program on top of the shows that he was on. And he expressed his gratitude and faith in me personally, and what the mission that I'm putting forth would Be the Change. And it was able to, not knowing that it was the last couple months of his life, it was able to change his perspective. So if he did have to go, he went with a positive, I guess, exit. He went with knowing that there is still goodness in this world, and still the ability for people to have a conversation and to take action on what they believe in. So I realized in that moment, my why right now is to have that effect on the Franks in the world.
Yeah, that's definitely powerful, especially when we're reminded just how temporary this experience is. You know, we sometimes forget when we're doing our projects and building our dreams, you know, we have this sense of eternity. And in some ironic way, it is eternity, because we're passing on our legacy through whatever vision, whatever advocacy, the butterfly effect, the things we say, the choices, the nuances of the choices we've made, that will be passed down through generations from all different people, you know, from all sorts of backgrounds. And first, I'm really sorry for your loss. And it is a very sobering time to know that, like, there is a real threat. You know, among many threats, actually. I think more in 2020, we're seeing the illumination of shadows, I would say, like the parts of us ourselves that are unpleasant to look at, but look at we must, because time's running out, you know, like that sand down the narrow neck of the hourglass is going down for each individual person. You know, it's an individualized experience. So the advocacy of Be the Change is really starting from the perspective of the person that wants XYZ to take place in the world, you know. And I think more than ever, we're doing a lot of projecting on each other. And to explain it to people who are hearing the term projection for the first time, a projection is essentially something, a shadow that you are personally contending with, but instead of being able to address it head on, like, oh, this is coming from me, you're recognizing it in someone else who's exhibiting similar characteristics that you've hidden in yourself. So you're denying that part of you that you might be ashamed of, but you see it in another person, loud and obvious, and you just keep trying to fix the other person. You're trying to control, trying to lecture, whatever that thing is. And I first heard of that term because I projected a lot on my little sister. So she's the one who called me out on it. And there came a point where I realized, okay, this is toxic behavior, and I need to own that now. I can't try and fix other people's toxic behaviors if my toxic behavior is still loud. So that being said, you know, you were saying about how failures are actually a way to have some kind of breakthrough. You gave the analogy of doubling down, you know, on the seventh hand or something, and somehow it just makes it up for all the other losses plus a little inch forward, just a slightly. Yeah. So that goes for entrepreneurship, but it also goes for personal relationships. And when we first started talking, you were saying about this existence of hate when you first experienced it, growing up poor and knowing by other people's false bravado or facade or whatever that you were made aware that you were missing something, even though had they not pointed it out, you wouldn't have had recognized. I mean, you know, as a young kid, we don't realize we're poor when we are.
Right.
We see reality for what it is, accept it, and focus on the good. And somehow
I knew. I was super precocious. And it's funny, but yeah, you don't like kids, but you don't, the thing is, you're not upset by it. If you get it, like, I think kids are more aware than we give them credit for, but the thing is they can handle it better than adults can, because they're like, it is what it is. As long as the parents, and this is the caveat, as long as the parents treat their children with love. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, often in underprivileged families, they don't always get that. That's where I was very fortunate, privileged, and blessed, because I had parents that loved me. And that was, as frustrating as you can say, well, I didn't get this. It still gives you that sense of, this is just life. It is what it is. And you just deal with it as a kid, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
So then my question is, like, from the time you first experienced, let's say, bullying and the existence of hate, what are other failed relationships moving forward in your adolescent that kind of got you to the seventh hand, let's say, where you were able to make it up?
Yeah, relationships are an interesting one. And I mean, still deal with that now. Some of my closest friends 2 years ago, just kind of, they're just not in my life. And I think that's just the lesson that I learned with relationships are to give everything you can, to not expect anything in return, but when giving has become arduous and there really just isn't that that play between the two, you have to recede back. And I think that's the lessons I've learned over time is often people beat it like a dead horse, and they keep taking punishment. Like you hear, I hear personally my friends that are having these kind of like, oh, this person's such, I don't know why I stay friends with this person. You don't have to. You really don't have to. You shouldn't be a cutoff. Like never be like, oh, they did one thing, be done. But learning over time with relationships all the way from when you're a child to when you grow up, people don't necessarily change. People do change, but it's on their own. They have to go through stuff. As a friend, consistently giving advice or being like, maybe you should try this, or like, this upsets me. And if they don't actually feel the empathy towards like little things and that communication, they're not ready. They're not ready to be your friend. And if you're that person, then you have to just work through things internally. You have to find out what makes you difficult. And I think all of us have those moments too, where we're like, I think I was the problem in that one. And it's that self-awareness and self-reflection that, again, we learn that over time. We get upset about the friendships we lost. I have one very distinct one that I won't go too into detail on, but it was one of my best friends. It was my best friend growing up. And last time we spoke was when he was 22, when we were both 22. 15 years have gone by. My mom was his second mom, and it's funny, I don't talk about him much. He just disappeared. It was the weirdest thing. We know where, our friends know I was his best friend in high school, and it was learning that one was a lesson learned in sometimes you have to just let go of control. You don't know what changed people. And that one was probably my most painful friendship that I've lost. He, come to find out that he was very uncomfortable in his own skin, admitting things, and he turned out to be homosexual, which I could not have given a crap less. Like, that's great. Like, great that like you're realizing who you were. And I think he was mildly ashamed at first and didn't know how his friends would react. And he left our whole friend group. I was the best friend, and then there was a whole group, and he really hadn't spoken to anybody in 15 years, and he got a new set of friends. And at the same time, I have to relinquish that control if that's what he wanted to do with his life. But that took years of realizing, like, and my mom was very, very hurt by it. It was like losing another son. And it's taking the time to realize that you're just going to make, it's not mistakes. There's going to be things in relationships that you just have to keep observing from, and realize that sometimes learning to let go. To sum it all up, learning to let go of trying to change people and trying to be in control of the situation. You can't control everybody's emotions and feelings.
Yeah, that's definitely something I could relate to on a personal level as well. I mean, it's just this balance of like, you really care about someone, but at what point does your caring become detrimental to both parties in the relationship? There's a saying that hurt people. So, I do believe that there are benefits in mirror work, meaning like two people in the same playing field on the same level, whether that's like at that level of wounding, and they could, in a way they trigger each other, but then they know from each other's triggering what exactly is the root that is kind of poking at each other. But then there comes a season where, okay, it's that time to pull away, and to really, sometimes we won't learn the lesson until the person lets go.
Right.
And it's one of the hardest concepts to understand, because we've been commercially, I would say, I don't want to say brainwashed, but just this idea of like this like long suffering type of love, where it's like, oh, whatever, like I will, and those do happen, and I'm not knocking it. I think those are very rare though. But I think that there comes a point where, you know, you are holding on way too hard and long, that it actually damages the growth of the other person. I mean, we hear about like enabling or codependency or what's the other word? Just coddling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
We've programming in terms of, because we watch movies, that we have in our mind, a love story should be painful. And I think it's because we've watched, and there's struggle and pain are two different things in this instance, in this moment. We see all these movies and it is like, oh, you know, the alcoholism, but they loved each other. And that's, oh, I wish I could have that love. And we watch it on a 2-hour movie or a TV show, and we think that that's what love is. And I think one of the positives about the modern world is we're starting to realize a true love story starts completely within. It's got nothing to do with the person that you are with. And to talk about personal relationships in my life, more so than just even friendships, I have when I get into these conversations on dates, people get a little like, you're 37 and you've never been in like more than a year relationship. And I know that's not necessarily good, but the reasons are very different for me. It's not I don't feel enriched as a person to struggle and try to find ways of making things work. That's just not who I am. And I like being alone, so it's fine. But my reasons behind it are a little bit different than some. So my dad had multiple sclerosis. I think we talked about that he was disabled earlier, but my dad had multiple sclerosis, and I watched him. He had been married 5 times in his life. He was, he had been in the mafia for a bit. He had married a French prostitute. Like, my dad had a life. Like, he had this crazy, crazy life. And then he got sick in his late 30s. And I saw him until he passed away. And his handicap was for 37 years. His disability went for 37 years. So it's like you saw this withering away of a person. And in the end, when I would still ask him questions about stuff, and I could see him thinking about the times when he was healthy. Like, I saw him, like, that's what his memories were. Like, he would just think about that. And I realized that life is short. And if I'm not doing something that fulfills me, then I can't fulfill somebody else. So it's not just about me, but it does start there. And if I'm forcing myself to do something, so when we're talking about struggle, there's good struggle, I think, and there's bad struggle. And when people force themselves to do something because they feel like it's the right thing to do, that's just not, it's not who my personality is. And when things start to feel wrong, I don't give up when, somebody's got a booger in their nose one time and I'm like, all right, see you later. It's more of is this somebody that I know that I can make it through struggle with in a healthy manner, and we could be supporting each other? And I haven't found that person. So having that conversation, I think, is very important, because you see people that will be 3 years into a relationship and they've gone through just immense struggles and they hate every bit of what they're doing. And then they break up, and you ask them the question, they go, when did you know things were wrong? Probably around 6 months, 4 months, 8 months. But they have this thing in their head that they need to be masochistic and just force it, because it's the right, I don't want to give up too early. I don't want to be non-committal. It's not that. No, it's start to learn how you are internally.
I definitely agree on that. Absolutely. I think that, like the saying goes, hurt people hurt people. So it's like, address the hurt first.
Yeah.
In your space. Because just from personal experience, when I'm hurting, there's nothing nurturing about me. I am aware that I become a vampire, sucking energy out of people around me, which is why I think there is an artistic solution to a scientific problem. So, we all have our, we have the DSM manual of issues out there, and crazy is so overused that at this point it's like we're just using it like we're
right.
Just giving away like free, I don't know, whatever's free out there.
Yeah.
Probably not good.
Yeah.
Out there.
There's a lot of phrases right now that are getting overused across the board.
Right. So my point is that, you know, the hurt first, I think I don't want to place a right or wrong about wounding and people hurting people, because it's not my place to judge.
Right.
I do believe in the supernatural law that, you know, when you forgive, you're forgiven. Like when you forgive, you're really releasing yourself. But when you
Right.
place judgment, all the things that you've done that are similar to what you're judging another person doing, you're also not off the hook either. So like
Right.
this whole kind of awareness is like, whoa, then it starts with who? The person inside. So where am I wounding? You know, and my question to you is, in your experience, what was your self-realization process that it had to start with you? Like, what could you give me, like an anecdote or a story of something you've gone through that might have been Groundhog's Day for you until one day you realized? I mean, what was
Yeah. I'll actually, because I think we have these moments, you have the aha moments all throughout your life. But in terms of when I came up with what my personal speaking topic was, which was overcoming failure, there was that self-realization moment. And I had Be the Change, and I knew that I wanted to speak on change, but I didn't know what my own thing was. So when I left my previous business in 2018, I was trying to also like piecemeal, like how am I, going to make money, do different things. And I got into stock trading. I got into options trading because I love math. I'm a weird artist. I like art and I like math, super odd. So I got really into options trading and I enjoyed it. And I always talked about the fact that my dad was a compulsive gambler and I never had that problem. And I never, like, I could go to casinos, I could spend a couple $100, have a good time, lose and be done, or win a couple, win 100, be done. No qualms, no nothing about it. No addiction, no rush. However, I started getting into options trading, and I had a decent amount of money that was saved from my previous business. And I knew that I had to pay a bunch in taxes from the year before. So I'm like, let me see if I can use this money to my own advantage. And I started learning and I got a little bit in and I started making a little bit of money here. And I was like, ooh, this is fun. And I did not realize that subconsciously I was building a little bit of an addiction and a rush. So then fast forward 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and I kept doing things wrong. Never made the same mistake twice though. So I was subconsciously using this negative progression mentality. I'm like, I know I'm losing. Oh, big mistake. Like learned about earnings season, learned about volatility, learned about all these being too greedy. And I kept making a mistake and I kept losing a lot of money and losing a lot of money and losing a lot of money. But I was like, as long as I don't make the same mistake twice, I'll eventually get this thing figured out. However, I'm forgetting that in the back of my head, my main mission is Be the Change. Like my main mission is to create this business. This was supposed to be a fun little side way to make some money here and there. And one day, after I could say that there had been 6 major lessons learned in about 4 months, I was working an event for something else. And I was also, day trading on my phone like a real smart individual. And I got into this one stock and I made a decent amount of money overnight on it. And then I went in to do it again on an option and I got greedy. So I almost made the same mistake twice, essentially, as something before, but I lost $7,500 in about an hour and a half. $7,500 that I did not have at this point. Like I did not have the income that I had the year before. And I realized that it did not even faze me. I was shaking a little, but then I recalled my father's gambling addiction, and typically a compulsive gambler has a bigger rush when they lose than when they win. And in that moment, I had that, oh God, no. So here's what has to happen. Either tomorrow I ditch what I'm doing across the board and I become a full-time options trader, because that's what's going to take. I can't mess around and just use a phone and whatever. I need to have full computers, get into it. And I know with the lessons I'm learning, I can make money, but I have to be fully focused and I have to do it the right way. But that's not what I want to do with my life. That's not going to change anybody's world. That's not going to allow me to have the influence to help help people, and what has clearly become even more so my why. Like, I'll never have that effect. I'll sit on my own and I won't have that impact. So that night I wrote a mission statement, like I was in the movie Jerry Maguire, overnight, and I wrote my piece. And the next day I started looking for speaking marketing coaches, book companies to start getting all my stuff done. And it was that aha moment of, okay, stop. You've failed a bunch of times in a row. Either you go all in this moment, or you change things up. So it's kind of that no one to hold them, no one to fold them mentality. And it was in that moment that I truly learned, and it got me set back on my path to create my own speaking. And I kept thinking, all right, now I want to be a speaker. And then as I would do certain exercises and vivid visions and about my speaking, I realized every vivid vision brought me back to be the change as a whole. Whereas my speaking was just a tool. My speaking was just part of this much bigger thing. And it's finally coming to this fruition point where we're having influence on people. People are listening and having better conversations. And it's really, really, it's a great first step of seeing the fruition of being bounced back around and finding that right path.
Wow. Yeah, I definitely hear you on that. It's so funny because, I mean, maybe it's funny, maybe it's not funny. It's funny to me at this point. My next book is called Diary of a Crazy Entrepreneur, but with the crazy crossed out. And it's a fiction based on a true traumedy, because
traumedy. I like that.
Because I realized that trauma is passed down generationally. 100%. I mean, I think at this point I've seen enough, personally experienced enough, talked to many people enough to realize that it's, to put it in context to someone who may not be spiritual, I would say it's an energy that gets passed down from the dad to the son, or the mom to the daughter, or whatever. You know, it's just, I don't know whether genetically predispositioned or whatnot, but it sounds to me that you knew on a fundamental level what you have seen through your father, and you've seen the pivot that went awry, whatever that moment was, or the series of moments was. And I can't even imagine like the level of pain that a son goes through to see the man that, you know, he used to look up to, kind of like, you know, it's like watching your heroes fall. It's a mini tragedy in and of itself, but then having to see yourself, that part of you that's coming through, like, oh yeah, I don't have that type of gambling addiction, but then that energy is showing up in a different way. It's a chameleon.
Yeah, it's manifesting in a different sense. Absolutely.
Right? But you were able to catch it at one point. Like, maybe not on one point, maybe for someone out there listening, it might be multiple points. It might be like, it might take several years. It's like, we know it's there, but what do we do with that thing, that energy? So I guess my question is like, what did it for you? What was that moment you're like, nope, nuh-uh, not me, not here, not now? What did it?
Are you talking that same, like kind of that same story? I can literally, if I can literally tell you where I was at a working Tulsa tech. Where was I? I was working Oklahoma State Fair, and I was on a lunch break when I lost that specific amount of money. And I remember, I could tell you exactly what bench I was sitting on. I could tell you when, because what happens with trading is when a stock is shut down by the FCC or FTC. Once that happens, because of like weird trading, you're screwed if you're in. and I just remember, the flush going through my body, and I just kind of remember, like, you know, your knees start to like move, and you're kind of like, ooh, that's not good, that's not good. And then it was just kind of like, it was like an instant. I was like, stop. Because in my head, I'm like, because my first thought was, lesson learned, let's move on. And it was like, no, this needs to be you need to stop. There sometimes has to be that pause. And there was the moment that kind of shiver got sent through my body. And I was like, okay, you gotta get your stuff together here and realize what your greater purpose is, because this isn't it. And I'd say there was a second time. So as I was creating this double down strategy or overcoming failure, so I've always considered myself since then a failure expert, because essentially what I'm doing is analyzing failures. It's weird. I had done several talks without realizing probably the most obvious personal story of mine. So this was I would say the second aha moment, or the second, oh, here it is. Like this serves a great purpose. How can I relate this to people? How can I tell people why failure is good and why struggle is good? So I'll tell you the story. So I'm part of being single at 37. You tend to be a little bit of a mama's boy. So, so I'm very, very close to my mother. She's my best friend. She did the core of raising me, and could not be closer to another human being. And I've been very fortunate to never have dealt with real depression. And that's one thing I've had to work on, is to truly empathize with people that deal with depression and realize how real that is. And my mom has dealt with depression. I knew that she went through things when she was younger and went through suicidal issues even as an adult. And I had my first real business that I got funding for and all this different stuff. It was called Pride Tags. It was dog tags. I've always had businesses that were themed on being a part of something bigger than yourself. So I think we're kind of seeing that into fruition now. But I had this business. Obviously, the recession hit, and I had funding. I had collegiate and school licensing. So everything was on path to have a real business. Things were going well. I was doing good. Recession hit. These items just didn't sell. There was no wholesaling, was no whatever. But I lived in Milwaukee for a period of time, and it was the Harley Davidson 150th anniversary. And I had a connection with Harley. I was living across the country at the time, but I had a connection still with Harley, and I created these dog tags specifically for them. And I knew that with my connection, I'd be able to get licensing. I'd be good to go. So I made them. I was down to my last little bit of funding, and I've come to find out that another company bought exclusive rights, and I now had a whole bunch of dog tags that I had spent pretty much the last little bit hoping to maybe, quadruple it, just something to get some revenue going. It was kind of my last Hail Mary. And now I'm going to have to hustle on a street corner and sell illegal dog tags during the Harley Davidson Festival when there's like 1 million bikers in town. And that did not excite me. So I had friends from Milwaukee that helped, and my mom said she'd come up from St. Louis at the time and she'd help me. And she came up, and I had so many friends. We at least broke even. I had so many friends that just helped out. Bars that I used to work at for different things, they would let me sell at their place. And my mom had an absolute blast. She was just selling on the street corner. And she came the day after I had one of 2 nervous breakdowns in my life. I remember sitting in my car, bawling my eyes out after I'd been hustling dog tags. I realized I can do that for other people, but when it's your own business and your life is on the line, you feel like an utter and complete failure in that moment. And it was like, couldn't breathe, went through the whole thing. And fortunately, my mom came to help me the next day. So for the next week, a couple days, we sold dog tags, broke even, had a great time with my mom. And I did not find out until a couple of years later that this trip was something that meant more to her than I realized. So she had lost her business in the recession. She was a chiropractor. She had been screwed over by her office manager, and she just felt very alone, and she was done. And she saw me growing older, becoming professional, looking like success was an option, or, in the right direction. And she had to battle her own demons. And I did not know that was planning to be her last hurrah. She was coming to help me. And then she was planning on committing suicide when she went home. And seeing that I still needed her was what kept her alive. So in retrospect, looking at it from a perspective of, I was in the biggest failure of my life. And in that moment, it felt like hell. But if I did not have that failure in that moment, my choice would have been I might not have my mom. So impressing that upon people, when I was building a talk or a speech talking about failure, and all of a sudden it came to me, I was like, how do I not realize this is the ultimate conversation piece to have with people? Like, people think that they're living in the worst situation they could possibly be in, and not realize that they might lose something even bigger if they weren't going through that struggle in the moment. So that was another big aha moment for me.
Wow. I'm so moved by this share. Honestly, it's yeah. It really is. We don't know what we don't know until hindsight, and then the pieces start coming together. And I wonder if that's really, I wonder if this reality is a simulation, and at the very end of our life, when we cross over, all the puzzle pieces come together, and you just have this instant download, like everyone's memories on the cloud, synced in, and you're just like, oh, that's why I had to go through that thing, because of that thing that happened. And 12 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, and he did that. It's just like, whatever, and we could just celebrate and laugh it off, and just it being a funny traumedy at the end of the thing, because it is fascinating how what we think as failure is actually a point of inflection, a point of pivot, a point of character transformation, which is the good kind of pain, I would say. But at the time when you're experiencing, you have no clue. You don't know. You think, I've had nervous breakdowns before. They do not feel like transformation. No. They just feel like you're dying. It's like it's done. That's it. So yeah, I would love to know more about the current project you have, Be the Change. When did you start it? Why did you start it?
Yeah. So I like to wait until you mute just in case, because I know you got an echo, so I'm just being careful. Sorry. I was like, dramatic pause. So with Be the Change, again, we started in 2016 without really a roadmap. It was, let me get this trademark and I want to see what I can do with it. And then in this year, again, in this moment of pivot, pause, not knowing what's going on, in March, I started working into more streaming stuff, just doing streaming videos and podcast type concepts. And then I realized in May that there's a little traction here. We can actually have some conversations. And then June happened. So we went from the issues with COVID closing down the country to then the beginning of what looks to be this crazy race war, and having those conversations. Some of the guys I was working with were like, we need to have a real conversation. And we were a diverse panel, and we said, let's talk. Let's have an open conversation. And ultimately our goal isn't to tell anyone they're right and they're wrong. Or wrong. The point is to try to get people to have a conversation in a different manner. And there's a lot of podcasts and different things that are trying to work on that. I think we're doing a really, really good job of it, because we've been able to bring in people from all different walks of life to start out like this and then to kind of end up like this. And we have to realize we're not that far apart. And before I finish, you used a term earlier about projecting. And I think and when you said it, I was like, that's the word I've been looking for. Because what's happening right now, and I think the conversation that we're tailoring things to is, just because something is super important to you does not mean it's important to that other person. So in this political landscape that we're in, and I always talk about being anti-political when you're having conversations, but part of being anti-political is talking politics and bringing people together. It's a weird thing. But somebody whose biggest issue is one thing projects the pain and the hurt that has gone into their life, and they project that onto their decisions, which is fair. But instead of projecting it onto their decisions, they project it onto the people that don't have the same beliefs. So they say, how can you not see this as the most important thing in the world? And they project that pain onto other people. And we're trying to bring those conversations together to say, your pain is not their pain. And that doesn't make them a bad person. So that's the core. So thank you for that word projecting, because I don't know why I have not thought of that, but you've said a bunch of things in the last couple of weeks between your why and the projecting. You've got some nuggets. But so we've been working now. We got very lucky, and again, everything happens for a reason. Once we had our first show about how to have a conversation, somebody sent me a viral video of a guy by the name of Cashley Kelly, and he had 4 or 5 million views at the time, and I sent him a Facebook message. I was like, I need to have him on the show. Why not? I'm going to do a quick fast forward. 2.5 months later, we're best friends, and I'm godfather to his newest child. Super weird. But all these different things have been falling into place at the right time, and he responded because my last name matched a guy that he was in juvie with 15 years ago, and he thought that maybe this was this buddy that he'd been trying to reconnect with. Turns out he got a new friend out of it, but it does fall on that whole path of there is this very spiritual, mystical path that we all follow, and things are meant to happen. And if it wasn't for him, I'm sure something else would have happened where things were going to continue to be positive as long as I stayed that way. But that was the trigger for this. And now we've increased our following in 3 months by tenfold. So 10 literally, and that's literally tenfold, not exaggeration. So it's a little hand clap. So yeah, that's when things started to change, and now we've got multiple shows going on. And I've said, look, I'm not going to make a living doing events right now because there aren't events. So what can I do? I'm going to fully invest myself in this business, which Be the Change is going through a capital raise, and we're trying to raise $1 million. And we're not a charity. I think I said that earlier. It's not about being a charity. It's giving to charities, and it's creating a positive movement and message. So this money that we're trying to raise is to grow our following, to literally grow this flock. So it's literally investment into a movement that eventually has a revenue model that don't need to discuss on the show. But it's been very interesting because we are at the point now where we provide value. Before it was, I need to have paid ads, work on content, whatever. Content is naturally happening. We're having shows called Change Makers, where we're bringing on people that are creating change. We have political shows, like I talked about, having people learn how to have a conversation. We've got people health-related shows, and we've got comedy shows, and they're all this variety of constant work, like 17 hours a day, building all this stuff, and with no actual income, which is an interesting mentality. But it's definitely showing right now that we are creating impact in people. People are having a conversation. Our last show last week was the first true hard political discussion where we had both sides on, and we had over 25,000 views. But the key behind it, we had 5,500 comments where people were not only listening, but engaging in conversation on the side. And a lot of it was healthy. Not all, but a lot of it was healthy. And to see that we're actually starting to create that impact, which is growing the brand, which again, that's the whole message. The bigger the brand, the more the impact can be. And that's the goal.
Yeah, I definitely, I'm very fascinated in how Be the Change can build these bridges because, yeah, I think what really needs to happen in right now, this very moment, our political climate, our the escalations that are coming, the name calling on both sides, the dehumanization on both sides, and what is the framework you would advocate other people set up when engaging in controversial topics?
I got you on this one. So this is, again, and I've learned a lot in the last several months how to have a conversation. And I actually just decided 2 days ago, I'm not engaging in any Facebook arguments anymore because I wasn't engaging the argument. I was trying to provide factual basis, which is also a problem. And the biggest thing that I was learning from the last 3 months of having discussions, typically I would step in as I think I talked about this. I would step in as keeping people from bullying each other. That was always my goal. I'm like, just why are we having this? So this is what the most important thing I've learned. And my friend Melissa, who we had as a guest on the show, and I've talked to her for a long time, she's a crisis specialist. And in the very beginning of all of this, what we talked about was the way to have the initial conversation. The initial conversation is typically the way that it's wrong is people have emotions, they're upset about something. So if they're upset about something and somebody doesn't understand why they're upset, they come in with facts and figures and logic. And that does absolutely nothing. So the lesson learned is you can't fight emotion with logic. What you can do, step one, and step one could take 5 minutes. It could also take 10 days. It could take forever. Enter emotion with empathy and listen, and just allow people to voice their issue and listen to them. Because if somebody realizes that they know that you feel differently than them and you're letting them emote, they're all of a sudden going to trust you. And these are friends are having these debates right now. So for you to start understanding your friends, have a little bit of empathy, listen, and do not feel as though you have to impress your point immediately, because that point will fall on dead ears. So essentially everybody needs to start deaf ears, not dead ears. Everybody needs to actually, if everybody started being this person, then this person their emotions would start to be less and less and less, because they would realize that the emotion is built off of this person. And there's never been an instance where if you yell at somebody, they're going to change. They're actually going to become worse. And that's what I'm seeing on both sides. And I'm like, oh no, like you're going, you should feel this way. You should feel this way. And it's like, has that ever worked in society? Has it, like, if you look at somebody that's like maybe borderline racist and you call them out for being a racist instead of showing them love, like Martin Luther King, show love, like show that. But if you immediately go, I think you're a terrible person, that's not going to have them want to start changing and becoming better. You have to show them love. Daryl Davis is a perfect example of that. He's gotten 200 people out of the KKK over the last 35, 40 years. He has this mentality that you have to plant a seed in concrete and you water it, and it takes time to crack and break. But you can't, if you just try to sledgehammer at it or whatever it might be, it doesn't work. I guess technically sledgehammer would work. That's a bad analogy. But ultimately, I guess the point is you can't just put the seed on the top and expect it to grow. You have to really, really get into it. And Daryl Davis is actually going to be a guest on our podcast, which I'm pretty excited about. So that's the gist.
Wow, that's beautifully said. And as you were saying it, I was like, dang, this is probably why I'm single right now. It's still difficult. I'll be quite honest. It's easy to hold space on a podcast or for me, on an interview. But when it comes to holding space for the people we deeply care about, it's just like it's knee-jerk reaction of like, okay, I see where you're coming from, but let me first tell you what the solution is. When really they're like, I'm in pain, and it's like being able to hold space is so critical right now, and also difficult, especially if there's so much the person perceiving the person yelling at them thinks there's a bigger stake, whatever that stake may be. It could be marriage, kids, it could be, the job that you want or will lose, the career you think you want or will lose. It's just the whole idea of holding space while someone is in it. Like they are emoting their trauma.
Yeah.
And when they're emoting their trauma, they just need a container. And to be that container, man, oh man, because number one, you're being triggered in that moment, and you might be re-traumatized in that moment when they're emoting, because then the shadows open up, and then it'll mess with your shadows. So if we're not strengthened and being anti-fragile, then we can easily fall apart in that moment and either close off, wall up, or we dismiss the person, and then I think that's where the dehumanization comes from. It's like, boom, you've like hit me right where the most vulnerable part of me is while you're emoting. Then my natural reaction is fight or flight. And especially if you're a good communicator and a great debater, then you're in trouble. Like you being the person that's holding space, because you know all the right things to say for that, like hook, that jab that's gonna just knock them out. And if you knock them out, yay, you're a winner, but then you're also a loser. You won the point, but you lost the war. You lost the real battle. And that's kind of like the biggest like seesaw that I'm seeing right now, both in my personal and professional space. It's like, how many people have I lost in a relationship? How many relationships have burned down because of this inability to hold space when someone's emoting, and being able to identify when they're emoting? Because see, when people get triggered while they're in it, they don't sometimes realize they're in it, because there's, it's like the bull, Red Bull, hello, bull, they just see red and like they don't even remember. I've seen so many shows and heard so many experiences of people being angry, and then like they come to and they're like, oh my god, what did I do? Just like they were in an alcoholic psychosis. It's just like, what did I do? So I guess my next question is like, how do you, what would be the steps to addressing, maybe it's not steps, maybe that's not the question I want to ask you, but more of like, what's your experience now learning through just, because I know Be the Change is rolling out in real time. So as each interview is happening or has happened, what are some new lessons you're learning in this new space of like holding space and getting into conflict, because conflict is necessary. You've got to have conflict or else nothing's going to get resolved. But in that conflict moment, that crisis moment, like what are you learning through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just like you said, being uncomfortable is the only way growth happens. So you do have to get in that conflict and you have to feel uncomfortable, because holding space when you disagree with somebody is uncomfortable. You just have to sit there and own it. And I kind of, so I that philosophy from before is half the battle, the whole emotion, empathy, and then eventually when the trust is built, you can start bringing in logic and you bring in your own truths. However, there's the words matter, and I think we forget that, because I see a lot of, and this is the great part about all the Facebook observation and fights I did, is I was investing in learning how people interact, and unfortunately, there's no context. Or I should say, there's no subcontext on social media. So you are seeing the brute force of people's black and white statements, and the one thing that's missing is that moment of pause, like I said, and actually being able to have that conversation in a civil manner. They might be civil at first, but you can't tell from behind the keyboard. So one side is this emotion, logic, etc. Emotion, empathy, logic. The one big thing that I've realized is how much, as I said, words matter. People love to throw around a couple words that if there's one correction or one realization I like to bring up is the word empath. People love to toss around the word empath. I'm an empath. I'm a this. And by definition, everybody that I've seen says they're an empath is very, very far from it. Because being an empath is not, I feel so much empathy towards these people. Being an empath realizes that across the board, everyone is hurting and you want to feel them. So there's this weird elitist feeling when somebody says they're an empath. I can tell you, I'm not an empath. I think anybody that says I'm an empath is not an empath. I feel a lot of empathy to a lot of groups, but being an empath is almost impossible. So it gives them this next level of, oh no, I get it, I'm an empath. So the people, and this is important for conversation, so this is kind of step 2 to what I said, is understand that if you truly want to work towards a place of being a full empath, which is a healthy place to try to reach and strive for, realize that if you want to help this group of people that you already feel very empathetic about, in order for the whole chain of events to work together as a group, you also have to realize that the pain that might have come from this group, or the environment, the upbringing, the generations of hate, bigotry, whatever, there is reasons they feel that way too. So being empathetic towards them instead of judging them is actually going to help the whole circle come together. So I guess the step 1 is understanding how to have that conversation. And then step 2 is looking internally and realizing if you're striving to be a full empath, to actually be empathetic towards all. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And by the way, I've been told that I've been a psychopath before. So I'll take it. I'm like, all right, I will be a psychopath, because at least I could start low with low expectations and work my way up. If I say I'm an empath, then that's a hard role to fill. It's like, I'm definitely not Jesus or, whatever, Buddha, whatever out there. I am seriously flawed as a human being. We all are. The first to say. And, speaking of psychopaths or apathy or paths, empath, psychopath, opposite spectrums. But, I think the whole human experience has a little bit of both. I look at it like a valve, like it's gonna contract and it's going to, expand, like in moments. Even in the Bible, they say, oh, I'm going to paraphrase, but even you evil people love your children. It's like we're all capable of love, right? That's why Breaking Bad is such a great show. So, it's just a matter of okay, so where do we go from here? And I want to just ask you a closing question is, where do you see be the change in context to what's going on in 2020, and where do you see it growing in the direction of in the next 5 years and beyond?
Absolutely. So again, this growth kind of happened a little not faster than expected, but quickly in this short period of time. So yeah, faster than expected. Let's be honest. So what's the initial intent of Be the Change was action taking. So you and I have talked a lot about communication, but part of the action that we're creating is in this moment is helping people have a conversation, but it was always to have a charitable aspect. And we were working a little bit with a charity called Regular Hero, which is still involved. He's one of the main, that charity is one of the main influencers, I guess, in our group. But Cash, who we brought on, who I have a godfather who's his daughter, I'd like to brag there. He started a charity called Streetlights Unity Movement and had no idea what he was going to do with it. Right when he went viral, he came from a very bad upbringing. He's like, I don't know. I want to start a charity and I want it to directly impact XYZ, which turned out was all along exactly what I've always felt about Be the Change, which was serving the underprivileged, making sure to get people to engage in volunteering, veterans and homeless, and a lot of and youth. So it's kind of that core group. So we are working now immediately in this space. What can we do right now? So Streetlights Unity Foundation or Unity Movement has its own page. And what we are creating is 50 groups across the country. So since we're talking a lot about inaction because we're talking about conversation, so we have to talk about action. So what can we do? So we're setting up 50 groups that are Be the Change / Streetlights Unity Movement groups that each state has one. We start the growth on each state level, and it's essentially empowering people to be the change they want to see in the community around them. We're mirroring it off of another page that we saw in Colorado that was very successful and had like 30,000 members. That literally the whole concept was, if you have something to give away, post it. If you can help somebody, post it. And if there's volunteer opportunities, because people always say like, why don't you go volunteer? Finding volunteer opportunities is not as easy as people make it out to be. So essentially posting these core concepts and then posting the positivity from the Be the Change page and the Streetlights page. And that's it. No random messaging. Otherwise it'll overflow, because the idea is to truly have people be able to help each other. So step one in the next couple months, start building these groups where we are empowering people to help each other. And that's number one. In the next 5 years, I do believe that the United States and the world will open back up again. But the core is to be just a heavy duty, full blown power player, whether it be podcast or streaming network in general, that creates constant positive content, full blown programming, and most importantly, live events, because I think there's something about the touch of a live event. So the way I've described exactly what we're working on is Tony Robbins meets Walter Cronkite. Walter Cronkite is this stable of truth and earnest being, and then at the same time, Tony Robbins is going to pep people up and give positivity and give people fun. So combining those two, explained over the next 5 years, is to have a full-blown positive media network mixed with large events where we can have great speakers and have people have fun and just change their lives in the moment and be the change ambassadors and streetlights and all that different stuff all as one. So that's the roadmap.
Sometimes you have to go back to basics, because I feel like right now we're all in arrested development in some ways. I don't know. I feel like I crossed over to a twilight zone, like in sometime in 2013, and I realized we all have so much to learn. If you could learn anything through is this your third business venture? Fourth or fifth? I read your lips.
Sorry, fourth or fifth. There's a weird marble rolling around somewhere on a different floor. I don't know what's going on. I would say fourth or fifth. Some little ones, some more. Yeah, I'd say fourth or fifth, but yeah.
Okay, so what do you hope to learn through this round, this venture, in your personal space?
This one feels, and again, always open to changing. This one, first off, feels like the one that I've been working for. All the lessons go into this, and I'm always open to failure. I'm not going to buck it until it stops, but I have a feeling that this is the one that will do what I believe I can do, which is actually Steve Jobs type style. The ones that are crazy enough to think they can change the world can. And I think this is that mission. So personally, what I think it can do in terms of the way it's making me, I guess, realize is ultimately I'm being more open to learning on a daily basis and listening, which as a speaker, we're not always the best listeners on the planet. And I think that I have evolved more in the last 5 months in my belief systems. And it doesn't mean I've changed any like drastically, but I've been able to listen and understand so much more about people. So interpersonally, my compassion level and understanding is at an all-time high for me personally. And that's a really cool thing for me to see, is this new level of self-awareness. So yeah, personally there's that. And then personally, just that true, again, like we said earlier, like now I really truly know my why. And no matter what, I've told people to go find your why. This is that moment, and this is that business, and this is that example where I truly know what it is, and it's not the standard wise. It is something very self-motivated and driven, and I know that's not for everybody, but it is for me. And I truly believe internally that if I want to be the change I wish to see in the world, I'm doing it, and I'm trying the best I can.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anthony, for making the time, creating the space to share your wisdom, your insight about failure and the power of failure in it, to keep trying no matter what hardships we experience. I just want to acknowledge you for being able to transform your demons into angels.
Appreciate that.